The big news coming out of science in the last 10 years, perhaps the last certain truth that science will secure before its transformation, and it's a very important one, it's that nature is self-similar across scale. This is something that couldn't have been said even 10 years ago. Nature is self-similar across scale. This is big news, big understanding. And what does it mean? Well, it means, I'm sure you all have pondered the similarity between the structure of an atom, a galaxy, and a solar system. And if you inquired about this, you were told it's coincidence. Well, P.W. Bridgman is the person who pointed out that a coincidence is what you have left over when you apply a bad theory. You see? So, until 10 years ago, when you asked this question, you would be told it's a coincidence. It's easy to make a scientific revolution. I can remember when I was about 9, going to my mother in a state of high excitement and saying, have you noticed that South America will fit against Africa like a puzzle piece? And then we looked into it and we were told, this is a coincidence. Well, it wasn't 10 years before continental drift made a revolution out of the earth sciences by doing what? By recognizing what an 8-year-old child could point out, that Africa and South America were obviously once joined together. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see this. You just have to have some experience with crossword puzzles and an open mind. So nature is self-similar across scales. That means that an atom is like a galaxy, is like a solar system, but it means more than that. It means that we can extrapolate toward cosmic processes by thinking about our own lives. Because our own lives are a tiny fractal piece of data that is part of a much larger, integrated, modular hierarchy that we now realize will have the same architectonic as our own immediate experience, except it will be expressed on a much larger scale. So that's the first and simplest part of this suggestion for a reformation of science that I want to propose. First of all, that this fractal principle be more clearly enunciated and understood. Everybody is talking about fractals. But it took Ralph Abraham to get it down to a bumper sticker for me. And it is. Nature is self-similar across scales. Companies explode the same way economies explode, the same way the biota of a continent explode. Processes are always similar, but only differ in scale. And what that means then is that our most immediate datum of experience, which is the feeling of being in a body, alive and feeling, can be extrapolated and mapped on to larger and smaller processes in the universe to give not only a sentient universe, a living universe, a dynamic universe, a universe with purpose, but it also gives us a universe with a very interesting set of closure properties that are different from the ones we learned from science. The thing about science and its cosmology is that it makes us irrelevant. We're told that we are an accident around an ordinary star, in an ordinary galaxy, in an ordinary portion of the local supercluster, and it's just ordinary, 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 nothing to be excited about. And then, you have existentialism, which says, well, then if you want to get excited, You have to admit that you're just doing it on your own hook. This is called conferring meaning rather than discovering meaning. We confer meaning, the existentialists tell us, and it's good as long as it lasts, and then that's nothing too. But all of these conclusions have been based on ignoring a second fact about nature that is as cogent as its fractality, and far more important for us, I believe. And this second factor is that the further back in time you go, the slower everything unfolds. Our present domain of experience is a domain of furious activity. I mean, many things go on this planet in a single day. There are inventions, there are books, there are transactions, there are meetings and dissolutions. We live in a busy world. As you journey backward in time, the world becomes less and less busy. And when you leave the domain of organic evolution, the world becomes boring as hell. And when you go further back to the period before even molecular chemistry, it's so boring one can barely compose a comment. So infused with ennui is the observer in the contemplation of the scene. But science has never inculcated this observation into its model of reality. We're told time is invariant. Therefore, this notion of speeding up or of complexity in some parts of time and not in others, it must be an artifact of observation. It must be an illusion or a mistake. It isn't real. But I maintain it is one of the most persistent facts about reality. And I've spoken of it here in terms of things get simpler as you go backward in time. We could stand that on its head and point out that things get more complex as you move forward in time. And that means that this moment is the most complex moment the universe has ever known, at least the local universe. That means, in a way, if the universe started at the Big Bang, it ends right here, right now, what I call local now, because the rest of time has not yet undergone the formality of occurring. So here we are, the inheritors of the Big Bang, standing in the ultra-complex local now. Now, what do I mean by complex? Well, on the platform of cellular evolution arose higher animals, complex ecosystems. On the platform of that arose early human culture. Upon that platform rose late human culture, including ourselves, including technology. My point here that I want to try to sell you on is that nature is a novelty-conserving engine of some sort. That far from being a random process driven toward entropy by the second law of thermodynamics, nature is a process of complexification. That whenever this process is dealt a blow, it immediately sets out to recover and surpass whatever previous level of complexification it had attained. Well, now, the important thing about this, other than just its intrinsic importance for people doing philosophy, is that it holds out the possibility of a theory of ethics, because we are the most complex phenomenon that we know of on this planet. Now, there you may edge forward in your seat, ready to spring forward with some objection, but give me a moment here. Complexity is a tricky concept to define, first of all, to define mathematically or any other way. Norbert Wiener and some of those people spent some time on this. But intuitively, I think it's a pretty straightforward concept. The way I define complexity is density of connections. If point A has 16 connecting points, it is less complex than point B with 32 connecting points. That seems fairly clear. You would have an uphill battle to argue against that. Some weasel might, but who knows? I mean, hell, you can't get consensus on what time it is. But if nature is a novelty-conserving engine, if that's what nature treasures, then we are not the chance witnesses of an existential universe. We are, in fact, all God's children in some sense. In other words, we represent the quintessent gathering together of novelty. We are more than mere matter. We are more than mere biology. We are more than mere Aboriginal culture. We are all of those things, plus we are our technical, our skin of technical connections, our extruded culture, our fecal coral reef of transistors, resistors, transponders, databases, and transmission systems. All of that is superimposed on the organic. So suddenly, this message that has been relatively ignored by secular intellectuals for 500 years, the message of our importance in the divine plan gets a real leg up. The puzzle then is, if we're the part of the universe where value has come to rest in the process of compressing complexity, then why is it that in practical terms we seem like a loaded gun held at the head of the planet? In other words, all other systems and processes seem to have been put at risk to achieve this thin and wavering spire of complexification that threatens to come down around our ears at any moment and send us back to the 14th century, if not the Stone Age, if we mismanage ourselves. Well, I think that we need to look at this process from the broadest possible perspective and try to decondition ourselves from the assumptions of science. Every theory has what I call a hard swallow. I mean, because every theory is horseshit in some sense. You know? I mean, truth is known in silence, so if you're going out of that area, you should expect some rather peculiar blemishes on the enterprise. So every theory has a hard swallow. Science, their hard swallow, is what's called the Big Bang. The idea that the universe sprang from nothing for no reason whatsoever in a single moment. So notice that whether you find that persuasive or not, it is the limit test for credulity. You understand what I mean? I mean, if you will believe that, what would you dig in your heels on? I mean, if you would believe that, then my family has a bridge over the Hudson River that we are willing to let go for a song, and you could really get in on something good there. The Big Bang is completely improbable. utterly improbable. It is the most improbable of all improbabilities. So just remember that when the fascism of science is telling you that astrologers don't know what they're talking about and somebody else doesn't know what they're talking about. I mean, science has built a house of cards on worse than sand, quicksand. I would like to propose a completely different theory, which sounds, I know, far-fetched, but I think it answers certain problems that can't be reasonably dealt with otherwise. I would like to propose that the universe is headed toward a singularity. Not that it was born in a singularity and has been blasted outward with the unraveling of the laws of physics ever since, but rather the idea that the universe is not a purposeless explosion running down into entropy, but in fact the universe is some kind of process that is running along fairly well-defined runnels, or what the British biologist C.H. Waddington called creodes. In other words, it is not a flat surface over which we are free to lurch and careen in some kind of random walk or parody of Brownian motion. It isn't that at all. It is a topology. It is a surface, a slalom, whose high walls confine us as we move deeper and deeper into the process of complexification. And we move into that process faster and faster and faster. And this is where it gets woo-woo, because I am, willing to say I'm convinced anyway. I'm willing to say I'm convinced that history is the enunciation of the nearby presence of a transformational event. In other words, a planet without history is what you get if it's business as usual. The chipmunks dig their burrows, the hummingbirds fertilize the nectar, the trumpet flowers, the ants dig out the ground. Everything proceeds normally. History is what happens when an animal species has its genome distorted by the nearby presence of a transcendental object. It only lasts 12 to 1,500 generations. It's very brief. In terms of the life of, if the life of this planet were a city block, history would be as thick as a piece of typing paper. That's how long it lasts. And yet, this is all we've ever known, the inside of this transitory domain called history. And without thinking about it very much, our secular society tells us to assume it will go on forever. Assume it will go on forever. That's a bigger stretch than the Big Bang for me. I cannot see how anyone could assume that human history will go on not forever, but let's say as long as it has gone on. Can anyone imagine the next 10,000 years of technological development and global civilization? It's a joke. Can anyone imagine the next 1,000 years or 100 years? I think that the asymptotic curve of technological development, complexification, the spread of communication technologies, and yada, 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 is happening so fast that within our lifetimes we can see the transcendental object rearing up and throwing the shadow of its enormous protean form across the surface of social processes and social evolution. The purpose of history is to create planetary crisis, and it's doing a splendid job of it. Apparently monkeys would rather kick back and chill. And so we only function well under pressure. And so the pressure is rising.